I felt like my heart was stuck in this other place, and I could sense that it was beating slower and slower. And I knew in this really deep way that if I didn't reconnect to my heart essence, that was going to be the end of me, that my heart wasn't going to make it on its own.
Are there simple things that people can do to help balance their nervous system?
That is my favorite question. I'm glad you asked that.
Before we dive into today's interview with Robin Landsong about her 3 lesser-known near-death experiences, I'd like to offer a trigger warning for abuse, specifically for sexual abuse and trauma, as this is a main topic of our conversation. Thank you so much for watching. Now, let's get into the interview. Hello, Robin. Maybe we could start out by having you share the 3 near-death experiences that you had when you were younger and what led up to those.
Yeah. So previously, I showed that to you when I was 8 years old, when I survived the Rhodesian War in 1977. And just to give people a quick recap of those, I was abducted from the U.S., taken by a man who was going to be a mercenary in the Rhodesian War. I ended up being shot by a soldier, and the bullet grazed my head. And so that was the cause of my first death experience. And then the second one, I was escaping when the soldiers came back, and I just the running started the bleeding again. So I had a second death experience. It was figured out that I was American, and I was sent back to the US with my family, who unfortunately had a culture of secrecy and didn't have an ability to actually hear what had happened to me. So there was very much a very direct message of don't ever talk about this. And so I literally suppressed it back down. There was no one safe to tell, as many people know that experience. And one of the best definitions of trauma that I've heard is it's not necessarily the event, but it's having to go through it alone. And that's the difference between something being difficult, but people being able to rise up and heal together versus what so many children do, myself included, of having to go through it alone. So you suppress it down, you compartmentalize it. And that is a high cost to the body. Takes a lot of energy in the nervous system to suppress things, to repress things down. And so by the time I was a teenager, I had to go through a lot more abuse and trauma from my family and some not mentally well people in my neighborhood. So by the time I was a teenager, my stress level was just beyond what my nervous system, what my body could hold anymore. And a really interesting fact that I've learned since then is that if your cortisol levels, your stress hormone levels, are so high, it will actually start to be so present in your body that it starts to deteriorate, like your joints, your ligaments, and eventually, if it's bad enough, your heart. And so I started having episodes from stress, and my heart rhythms were being disrupted from this excessive levels of cortisol. And if I exercised or got stressed, or sometimes even if I got really happy, I would go into a state where my body would shut down. And again, since then, I've become fascinated by all these things. And so I've been a craniosacral for 20 years. And really, I love learning about what's the truth about what happens in our nervous system in response to trauma and what are the benefits of our healing process. And my definition of healing is turning towards yourself, saying, I see you, saying yes to your truths of what has happened in your life. So what happened to me when I was a teenager, I did a lot of sports. I think it was an intuitive way to try and heal some of the cortisol level in my body was to be really active and be really engaged. And so my senior year in high school, I was on the swim team. I'd been trained as a swimmer. And whenever my heart rate got to a certain point, it just kind of reached a threshold where it couldn't function anymore. And so it would shut down. And so instead of rising to the occasion, I was so exhausted, I could no longer rise to the occasion anymore. And so my heart rate would shut down, my blood pressure would drop, and they would have to pull me out of the pool and revive me. And so my coach called my parents and said, I can't let her back in the pool. This is dangerous. Something's really wrong with her. You need to get her medically checked out. And unfortunately, I was living in a house that was, like I said, minimizing, blaming me. And they said, oh, she's probably just making something up and being dramatic. They went ahead and, at his recommendation, and made a regular doctor appointment for like 2 weeks from then. And I wasn't letting them know how much I was fainting and going unconscious because it wasn't really a culture of safety to even talk about those things. And so what happened to me, I was with my boyfriend at the time, and we were actually planning a fun backpacking trip. So it was something that was fun and exciting. And all of a sudden, I had this huge rush of panic in my body. And then I had the natural instinct, the urge to run. And again, this is from my repressed trauma from when I was 8. And my heart was pounding hard. And I looked at him and I said, I'm really not okay. I need to lay down. So he laid me down. And I just had this feeling like I might go. And so I said to him, like, don't worry. I feel really bad, but I think I'm gonna be okay in the big picture, but it might not look very good. And so my heart rate went high, and then boom, my heart just completely slowed down. My blood pressure totally bottomed out. And I now understand that's the body going into a form of what's called parasympathetic shock. And it's a dormancy, a hibernation that all mammals are capable of doing. And so my spiritual experience of that, my ears are buzzing, with my blood pressure being so low, undetectable. And I started crossing over to the other side. I was falling backwards through layers and layers and layers. And I arrived to this place that was kind of like an overview looking down on like Irish rolling hills. And I was zooming in my perspective and I was seeing parts of me all scattered out in this landscape. And so there was a part of me that was kind of central where my awareness went to. And that felt like it was kind of the most of me. But what happened is that I felt like my heart was stuck in this other place. And it was in this maze, just like we see those kind of stone mazes in some of these historic landscapes. And my heart was over there, and I could sense that it was beating slower and slower. And I knew in this really deep way that if I didn't reconnect to my heart essence, that was going to be the end of me, that my heart wasn't going to make it on its own by itself, being so isolated and alone. And I was trying to get up, but I was paralyzed in the form of body that I had. And I thought, how I need help trying to reconnect to my own heart. And I could also tell that there was kind of other lost parts of me in this maze. And I thought, what's going to reconnect all of me to myself? And this feminine presence came and she was singing to me. And there was this peaceful, peaceful singing. And I'll just try to replicate some of what it was like for me. Yeah, Yehovah, Sheyayahiyam, Oyayayam, Holy. And as she kept singing to me, it was sweet and deep. And I felt some hope that I was going to be able to reconnect all the parts of myself. And then it may not happen now, but someday I was going to be able to come home, have my heart come fully home to myself. So she connected me back together enough that I was returned to my body, and my my blood pressure was starting to increase, my heart was starting to re-engage. And when I came back, my ears were buzzing, I was paralyzed, and I felt like my body had just literally kind of dumped all this garbage into my system. And what I understand now is that I was doing some of my trauma healing work, but that tends to feel really awful sometimes. So my boyfriend at the time, he was very frightened, and he was like, I could barely find you breathing. I couldn't really sense your aliveness at all. And I asked him how long, and he said, you were gone for about 20 minutes. And I think he was also kind of a disempowered teenager. Otherwise, he might have called an ambulance which in the big picture was, kind of saved me all that medical intervention. So I just had to rest and I really couldn't walk for about another 2 hours. And eventually my nervous system recovered enough where I could move my limbs and I could feel. And when I was able to go downstairs, walk down the stairs that night, I tried to get across to my parents, something really concerning happened with my health. And again, it was that kind of minimizing, blaming, like, oh, you're just exaggerating. Other people have real problems. And they just weren't able to be in compassion or the very tangible information I was giving them about, I'm having big neurological problem here. So they didn't feel resourced to be able to help me or even hear me. So again, that kind of doctor's appointment was looming off. And I think it was about 3 days later where the same thing happened. I was in the kitchen by myself. It was a brick floor. So I started to have that rush of panic, the need to run for my life. And then I knew I was going to pass out. So I squatted down to the floor and kind of rolled down. And this time I went even further. And again, incredible buzzing in my ears with my blood pressure completely dropping out. And what was happening on the outside is my mom found me, and she's a registered nurse for many years. So she was taking my blood pressure, couldn't find any heart rate, had called an ambulance. And when the ambulance showed up, they did resuscitate me. But what was happening for me is that I was leaving. I was going to freedom. I was getting a deep, profound rest from the trauma content, from the stress, from the loneliness that I was feeling here on earth. And my experience is that I drifted out. I drifted out. I was looking back on the earth. The earth was getting further and further away. And I was feeling so held, so spacious. And at a certain point, I kind of landed on something that best where I can find it, it was like a raft. And I was laying on this raft on my belly, and I looked back, and there was a golden tether that was keeping me just the right distance. So I knew eventually when I was done with this experience, I was going to go back to Earth because this golden tether was going to draw me back. But it was keeping me from going too far because I knew if I drifted further, further, further out, I was going to break apart and just be molecules in the universe. And this golden tether and this raft were keeping me in some kind of organized form. And I felt safe and comforted. And and it's ironic so many people can understand that sometimes if you're with people who can't understand you or see you, you actually feel more lonely, more unseen. So out in this universe place, I felt accepted, welcomed, and deeply part of. That I knew I was with the origin place that were the ingredients that have made who I am. And and I tried to look down at this raft, like, what am I actually on? What is it that's keeping me buoyant, keeping me safe, keeping me organized into a being? And since then, I've really tried to draw out this image and looked at this image. And what I realize is it matches a cell membrane. It had this amazing organization in it. And if you look at a cell membrane, it has this profound, miraculous organization in just the membrane itself. So, a real insight for me from this death experience, this visit home, is I was in both the macro, the whole universe, and the micro on a cell membrane. And And the cell membranes are what keep me being human, keep basically all the units of universe that I am organized so I can be a human being. So I was returned back to my body when the ambulance resuscitated me. And what was happening was they had the oxygen mask on me and it was just a little bit shifted off and the plastic edge was up in my eye, which is surprisingly painful. And so I was telepathically telling the ambulance attendant, like, notice that this is in my eye. And he just stopped what he was doing because, of course, they're very busy with, attending to getting me on the gurney and getting ready to put me in the ambulance. And he just noticed and he just shifted the mask over. And that moment of kindness rooted me back to humanity, let me know that he heard me. And so I felt seen by another human being. And I felt his kindness, his caring. Because some people might say, well, they're just trying to resuscitate your heart, and that's the most important thing. But to have that little extra kindness, that little extra care, noticing me, is what helped me want to live, that there are decent people and that there is human kindness. So I don't actually remember the ambulance ride. I think I went back out again. And when I came to again, I was in the hospital. And I don't often share this part because I don't want to necessarily say bad things about my mom, but I just want to get this across because I think it's an important part of the story that when I opened my eyes, she was looking at me as if I had done something wrong and hurt her. And so many people, so many parents who don't have their own attachment, their own self connection, they use their children kind of vicariously to feel something, to feel alive. And so by me going into death, it brought up all her abandonment. It brought up that I had left her, I had done something to her. And she told me she couldn't find a heart rate or a breath rate for about 3 minutes. And again, she's a registered nurse, so she knew how to assess that. And so that's so much a part of my dedication to helping heal people's attachment trauma and helping them realize our ability to connect to ourselves and connect to others is the foundation of generational healing. Like if she had been able to do her work instead of kind of making me feel guilty for dying and crossing over, there would have been compassion and receptivity on her part that I had just gone through something really huge. But instead, with her unresolved trauma, she had to make it about her, which is very unfortunate and certainly very unfortunate for me as a teenager. So, unfortunately, the medical system, this was when I was 18 and I'm 54 now. So, the understanding of trauma and trauma response was not available in allopathic medicine. So they could assess my heart had damage, but they weren't able to look at, and I think they had assessed that like my cortisol levels were off the charts, but they couldn't put two and two together that this was from past trauma. And I remember when they did all these tests and they said, we don't know what's wrong with you. Now there might be some understanding if they knew trauma response and they knew, about parasympathetic shutdown and what cortisol does to the heart. And I remember sitting across from the MD when they were discharging me. My parents weren't with me, I was by myself. And he had all these degrees behind him, a big mahogany desk. So there was just very much a hierarchy set up. And and he said to me, maybe if you just don't stress so much about your grades, then you'll be fine. Like we don't know what's wrong with you. We don't know why you're dying and having these episodes of paralysis. And of course they did many tests on me. And again, kind of in his lack of training, his lack of awareness, his lack of understanding how to serve a teenager who's that stressed, he told me a story about another girl who was a overachiever who ended up ending her own life. And, they're discharging me with no answer, no solution. They're just telling me it's all in my head. And he's telling me a suicide story. And I'm looking at like all the degrees behind him and thinking, you don't know anything. You have no idea how to be of service to me right now, how to meet me. He never asked me if I was safe. He never asked me, if there was any kind of resource for me to connect to. So part of why I love to do my work is to emphasize we all need connection. We all need safety. And had he been trained or more prepared in his life to be able to see me, which I think there is more of that happening now, then he might have been able to ask better questions and certainly not tell me another young woman's overachieving story that ended in her ending her own life. Because, of course, I was completely on the edge of just wanting to go. So I ironically suppressed my trauma response, suppressed how stressed I was, and made it through the rest of high school, got to college, And then when I was in the safety, the second college I went to, my second year, it was a very it was a very liberal environment. So the discussions were happening about homophobia and racism, sexism, open discussions about assault on women. And so I was starting to feel safe for my trauma history to come up because there was a place to discuss these things. And so I started having nightmares of the repressed trauma and the sexual assault and the sexual abuse. And from one of those nightmares, sometimes in our trauma healing process, something comes up and it can no longer be repressed back down. So I had this nightmare about sexual assault as a child, and I went to class that day. And it was a very fun class. It was a really great group of people. It was outdoor leadership. And the professor was not there that day. We were all doing student presentations, and it was laughter and connection. I felt very much part of, and I felt belonging. But here I am with this nightmare, like, and the knowing of my abuse history is right there under the surface. I'm trying to pretend I'm fine. I can laugh and look okay, but deep inside, I'm really struggling. And so one other student started presenting their project, and again, my heart started to race out of control. My blood pressure went up and then completely dropped out. And then I stopped everybody and said, I'm going to pass out. It's going to look really bad. I might look like I'm not breathing and you can't find a heart rate. Don't worry about me. Just put a blanket on me. I'll be fine. Again, I come from a family that's telling me for years that I'm just making things up. So I'm minimizing. Fortunately, they didn't believe me. And when I went unconscious and they couldn't find a breath rate or heart rate, they called the EMTs. And this college had an EMT program, so they were there instantaneously. And so what's happening on the outside is they're getting out the AED equipment and getting ready to volt my heart. And just so people understand, the machine won't work unless your heart is really stopped. So the machine assesses that itself. And what was a real gift for me is that one of my friends was the lead person on the EMT team. So I'm drifting, I'm in the tunnel, I'm having this beautiful tunnel experience, and I hear his voice. And and he says, Robin, it's Jamie, I'm here. And I can hear him just taking the scissors and cutting open the front of my shirt. And I think that's so nice of him. He's doing that because he loves me, not at all worried, like, oh, I liked that shirt. And so I'm drifting further and further in the tunnel, and I'm having just a peaceful restoration and thinking, why does this feel so familiar? Why do I feel so loved in here? And just all my trauma stress is left behind in my nervous system and my body. And I'm getting a deep refreshment, a deep reorientation. Again, the what it takes to keep going when you've got that much trauma in your system and the magnitude of the years of work ahead of me that I was going to have to do to resolve all that trauma. So I just felt like I was getting to touch divine source. And so the tunnel was getting bigger and kind of a wider opening, a more spacious place. And this nourishment, this peace. And again, I'll go ahead and sing the walls have a song. So and so I'm drifting, the song from the walls is percolating through me, reassuring me that I belong, I'm worthwhile, I'm worthy of love, I'm worthy of being welcomed home to the great source, to the great heart. So in the meantime, they've got the AED on me. I'm very, very faintly hearing what's happening. And my friend Mary is crying and she's saying, Robin, you have all these reasons to live. And she's reminding me that I love to go for walks and hear the birds and the trees and nature. And so right after that, I hear clear. And again, this is coming through the tunnel, very kind of distant sounds, but It kind of reaches me like it's a long tube I'm listening through. So I hear clear and then I feel a bolt, boom, pulls me back towards my body in the tunnel. And I think, oh, I wish they wouldn't do that. I'm having a really lovely time in here. And I just need a deep nourishment. I need more minutes in here. And I think, but they're worried about me. It probably doesn't look very good. So I understand that they're doing this because they love me. Again, I'm kind of pulled away from the great heart, pulled back to my body. And again, I hear clear, boom, pulling me back. And just for a millisecond, it's sort of like the analogy I make. It's like Christmas lights that have a faulty plug-in. And so they kind of flicker on for a second and then they go back out. So it's kind of like the second AED volt kind of flickered my light on for a second, but then kind of went back down. And again, the first time that the AED vaulted me, it felt great. It was like a super amazing massage to my heart. And I thought, oh, that's so lovely. And the second time, it felt a little harsh, but still felt really good. And so again, I hear clear, boom, they vault me back. And this time it doesn't feel very good because it boom lands me back in my body. And I think, oh, darn, I just needed a few more minutes of refreshment in there. So I'm back in my body. Doesn't feel very good. It feels like, again, when you release that much trauma and it's a process of integration, but it feels like your body is full of garbage, like every cell has a weight in it. So it felt terrible and it felt like, oh, what a bummer. I'm glad my friends feel better, but I don't. And so they start strapping me down in the gurney, taking me to the hospital. And again, I've got all this trauma history and kind of being repressed as a child or held down as a child. So just even strapping me in hits off trauma response. And so I go from being total parasympathetic shutdown to where I don't even have a heart rate to boom, sympathetic activation where I'm defending myself because they've strapped me in. And so my nervous system completely gets this whole surge of energy. I sit up, I tell them, don't strap me down. I take the straps off, and then boom, I pass back out again. And again, the nervous system is totally capable of responding for those two extremes, depending on our nervous system's perception of danger. So, of course, they need to strap me down. They're going to tip me up into the ambulance. So, but it completely scared the EMTs later on. They were like, we didn't know where that came from. And so I do go to the hospital. I know, again, allopathic medicine isn't really prepared to deal with this kind of nuanced understanding of the nervous system and trauma response. More people are learning about it and learning about polyvagal theory, but they weren't prepared. They gave me an IV, checked out my stats, and basically just said, we don't know what happened to you, and just sent me back. The beauty of all of this is that I could no longer suppress my trauma. And from there, I went to inpatient trauma treatment units, and the memories of trauma just kept pouring forth and pouring forth. And so that was when I think I was 19, and I had a birthday and then was in the inpatient trauma treatment units for many months. I would get done one and still have so much trauma coming up that I would go to another. And what I want to say is we need so much resources, when we have that trauma content coming up. We need people who are skilled, trauma informed, and safe spaces to be able to allow it to keep coming back up. And that shaking is a perfectly normal way for all mammals to work through trauma. So when people shake, that's an excellent way to work through trauma. We just have social norms that get confused about the value of that. But we know that all animals shake if their life is threatened, and that we shake to warm up, and that it's an essential response to even revive in our nervous system in order to get well. And like I say, because of these really profound experiences and because of not getting the right help by the allopathic medical system, and even a lot of therapists kind of didn't have this information at the time, is that I've just invested in learning about this and teaching about this because I want people to feel normalized. I want them to not feel shame, not feel like this is their personal failing, but this is just nervous system mammal biology, that people shake, need to work through these things, and how returning to connection or self connection our connection to others, our connection to the land is absolutely essential for our wholeness. And that the further I've gone in my decades of healing, the easier it is for me to take care of myself. Like I don't struggle with eating foods that are harmful for me or hanging out with people that are harmful for me. Whereas when we have a bunch of repressed trauma in our nervous system, our self sabotage, our doing things that are counter to living a deeply filled, pleasure filled life, we're constantly doing things that are just in a sort of way trying to activate the trauma to wake up and heal in our nervous system. So again, I just like people to feel connected and that post traumatic stress isn't their personal failing. It's just what happens when we've had something, an overwhelming experience that we haven't had the resources, the companionship to resolve yet.
Robin, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And typically, I will ask my guests questions about their near death experiences, but today I really would like to focus on the healing of the trauma because I think it's something that needs to be talked about and affects so many people. And I really appreciate your message of compassion and just helping people to understand that there's nothing wrong with them or with their bodies. And this is a normal way that we are designed to heal. So I would like to ask you, what happens to a person's nervous system when they're going through trauma to set it off balance like that, to where it's either in fight or flight or shutting down?
So one of my teachers is Stephen Porges, and he developed the polyvagal theory. And then one of his colleagues is Deb Dana. So I'm just giving a resource so people can dive deeper. Let me go ahead and, is it okay if I show a book?
Yes, of course.
So I'm giving you this title so you can see her name. So Deb Dana, she has taken polyvagal theory and made it easier to read because it's quite deep science. And I have the training to be able to kind of go to that level, but she makes it much more accessible language. So the really key that Stephen Porges teaches is that in the moment when we perceive our life is threatened, and whether that's abandonment, whether that's violence, then our nervous system in less than a millisecond makes the decision about whether to go into rage or whether to go into shutdown. Our personality does not make that decision. And that point that Stephen Porges makes is that if it was up to our personality, kind of our conscious frontal mind, it's too slow. Instead, our kind of survival limbic nervous system makes this micro decision about which way to go. And like I said, with my example, we can go from one to the other in a millisecond. And it's very confusing to ourselves and to people. So I like to share that because the majority of children who aren't physically powerful can't fight back against their abuser, that the biological imperative, the better choice is to go into numbness and shut down and to not fight back. Very few times when you're a child is it going to work out best for your survival and your relationship with your, you know, the abuser to fight back. Maybe to run if you can, but again, children aren't as fast as an adult or stronger. So I like to share that. And then another piece that's quite hidden is that if it's sexual abuse, sometimes it's also the body's best decision to have an arousal response to that sexual abuse. Even though it's entirely unwanted, it is going to be a less violent event if the body has some arousal response. So I just like to share that for both men and females, that there can be a lot of confusion and shame about that. But again, it's the body figuring out, how am I going to best survive this minute in this circumstance? And it's like a moral violation to have your body get aroused when you never wanted this contact in the first place, but it's going to make it easier to get through it in that moment. So I like to share that because it can help reduce people's shame to even get started on their healing process.
Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Another thing that I noticed that you mentioned is that later on, your trauma response would come up when you felt safe. And I also have noticed that in myself, although to a much lesser degree. I wasn't passing out or anything. But when I would feel safe or I would feel like life is just going so well, like it's too good to be true, all of a sudden I'm panicking. Why is it that our body responds that way?
So there can be two things. One, there's overcoupling. So when something is calm and spacious, it gives space for whatever else needs to be addressed to come up. Sometimes people will keep themselves really busy or full or on their phone all the time so that there isn't space for what else needs to be seen to come up. And again, if people can just, what I did a really great training at Stanford on compassion. And one of my teachers said, just turning towards yourself and saying, I see you to the suffering is compassion. And that alone, just stopping what you do to avoid phone, food, dramatic relationships, being too busy, if we just tone down and turn all those down and we turn towards ourselves and say, I see you with kindness, then that is the foundation for healing. So that's the first piece is that calming down, giving space allows things to come up, allows emotion to come up. And then the other piece why sometimes people can panic if they're meditating and they're doing some deep breathing is if we survived abuse, we became hypervigilant. And calming down, getting to a restful nervous system state can set off the signal of, oh my God, you're not paying attention. You may not see what that your dad's drinking and be prepared. Or you may not be hypervigilant to like track, whatever's happening in your house. So we can overcouple that safety and rest is going to lead to violence that you didn't notice coming.
Thank you for explaining that also. And I know this is a huge topic and you've had years of training on this, and there's no way that we can fully give an answer to this in the next few minutes. But aside from obviously getting professional help, are there simple things that people can do to help balance their nervous system?
That is my favorite question. I'm glad you asked that. So, movement, dance, qigong, yoga, everything that can get you sensing your body. Again, numbness is dissociating from the truth in our body. So coming back through movement, and I want to make a little caveat there. Sometimes people exercise in a way that's continuing to numb them. And I did plenty of years of that. So coming back into slow down kind of movement, things where you actually notice your internal sensation, your internal landscape, that is profound. And so getting body work, massage, acupuncture, craniosacral. And I'm a big fan of therapy when you find the right therapist. But the big message I want to get across is that's not the only way. So if you're a person that feels like, whoa, going in and talking to somebody about my personal stuff is something I'm never going to do, it doesn't mean you can't heal. And that's because there's a certain percentage of people that therapy is a match for, or it's going to make cultural or financial sense to them. And there's a whole lot of people, either financially or otherwise, it's not going to be their modality. And so many cultures, it's about community dance. It's about drumming. It's about how can I come back into the rhythm of my body, the rhythm of my breath, really educating yourself. There's so many great books. I'm writing a book on trauma healing, and I'm doing it from a perspective of us, we trauma survivors. And I started researching kind of what's out there. I mean, you can just Google trauma resolution, trauma healing. You can get 40 books and just see which one's right for you, or just watch Stephen Porges or watch Peter Levine, or, get some Deb Dana resources. So there's so many ways you can educate yourself. And the other key piece is nourishment. We can keep our nervous system jacked up with fast food, with sugar, and we are trashing our dreams. We are not caring for this gift that we've been given. So movement and nourishment are my two things, in addition to, things like receiving body work, going to classes where there's community movement. When you see, when here in Mount Shasta, we have a really lovely ecstatic dance that I go to almost weekly. And just to watch other people move their body is helping my nervous system. And for them to watch me moving, all this integration. And of course, because I'm trained in it, I can see people who still have trauma to resolve, but they're there in community, co-regulating, watching other people move smoother than they can. And so is how we help each other heal. We're a clan of human beings. And so every time we can see somebody else who's a little further along than we are, or a lot further along, it is going to let our nervous system know that's where I'm aiming. That's where I want to go. I want to get to where I can have vocal prosody, like a space and peace and dynamicness in my voice. I have lots of facial expression now. I didn't as a teenager. My smile was fake and flat. So watching and hanging out with other people who are pretty nervous system healthy is one of the best gifts you can give to yourself. Retreats, like I'm going to go to a dance retreat pretty soon. And so all those things, and the more you unburden your nervous system of that trauma content, the more freedom and options and safety you'll experience in your eating, in your relationships, in your relationship with yourself.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of those different resources. And I appreciate you sharing all the various options that are free and accessible to people, because I have definitely thought before that although it shouldn't be this way, mental health resources like seeing a therapist can almost be a privileged thing where if you're not at a certain level financially, you don't have access to that.
Mhm. It's totally true. And especially for most people when they're in what I call the gritty years of trauma resolution, like, some people are workaholics and have made a bunch of money,
Mhm.
but a lot of people are really struggling with basic survival and
Mm.
you just kind of recycling in their trauma response. So yeah, movement, just even putting on a song at home by yourself, that can be trauma informed movement.
Beautiful. Well, Robin, I would like to give you a chance to share where people can get in touch with you and any projects that you're working on that you would like people to know about.
Mhm. One of my colleagues, Luis Mojica, said, when you turn trauma energy, when you transmute that, it becomes creative energy. Mhm. I have so many projects I'm working on. Right now, I am a visual artist. And so I have more ideas than I can physically keep up with. I'm working on 2 decks with other people. And so one's a trauma resolution deck and one's a purpose and activism deck. I'm working on 2 books. One's finished, my memoir is finished, and working on getting that published, working on the trauma resolution book. And again, really speaking to the dignity of we trauma survivors can be some of the most potent activists in the world. I'm working, I do the singing medicine, so I'm going to go down to LA and work on some more music tracks and recording the singing medicine. I have a new friend who's a music composer, so he's putting piano and other accompaniment with my singing medicine. And right now, I do 5-person groups online. So people want to have healing and singing medicine. And I've got a documentary in the works about just what I was saying of all the different ways beyond psychotherapy that we can do our healing work so that it's a really welcoming message and increasing people's confidence that therapy is not the only way.
Wow. And that's so inspiring to me. And also is a message to people that just because you've been through trauma and you've been through these extreme hardships, you can heal and live such a beautiful life, so full of creative projects and beauty. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being here and sharing your message, and all the people that you are touching with your message and with your art and your music and your writing is just so important. So thank you. Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, and comment with your thoughts and opinions. And check the description box for the links to my TikTok and Instagram, where I share the more personal side of my life, my website, where I share my paintings and merch, and also the Be a Guest link for anybody who's interested in sharing their story. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and thank you for watching.